I wanted to talk to you about biodiversity and how biodiversity plays a role in basically everything. but there's a great article in one of the science magazines here, and I thought I had it right in front of me, but about how as diversity diminishes, the probability of extinction goes up. And it's not like, you know, hey, we have to worry about this particular species or that particular species because without them you don't have, you know, a viable ecosystem. It's instead the frequency of them, the number of them, not the frequency, the diversity, the number of different species that are available because they're so interrelated and interdependent upon each other. The study was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences by Dirk Sanders, the University of Exeter in the UK. And they show that when you remove a species from a simple community, that is a community with fewer overall species to begin with, it triggers extinctions in other species. And Dirk Sanders, actually Jason Battelle, writing about this, says, what's more, the scientists provide evidence that more complex communities, those with more species, are better able to stave off the chain of events that leads to extinction, where one loss leads to another. So this is an important, you know, scientific, ecological concept, but it also is true of economics. It's also true of culture. It's also true of politics. It's true right across the board. Diversity is a healthy thing. And diversity is a necessary thing. And so as we're killing off parts of our biosphere, as we're reducing diversity, we have, for example, with our food products, we have, you know, it used to be that you could buy dozens of different kinds of apples, right? You go into a store and there'd be the Jonathans and the Winesaps and the something Betty Beauties or whatever they were called. There was a bunch of apples. I mean, Michigan, I grew up in Michigan. I told you last week I spent a couple of weeks when I was 16 picking apples up in White Cloud, Michigan. And the apple orchard had multiple different kinds of trees, and we had to keep them separate because, you know, some people wanted tartar apples, some people wanted smaller apples, some people wanted bigger apples, some people wanted sweeter apples. There's all these subtleties of flavor. I remember the Jonathan apples were my favorite, and they tasted so good. We're now down to basically two kinds of apples. You know, you want a red apple or a green apple. And that's just the very smallest example. We have basically one or two species of wheat that dominate all of our wheat. We have, you know, one or two species of soybeans, and if Monsanto has their way, there'll only be one, and it'll be theirs, and it'll be GMO'd, and it'll be patented and trademarked and everything else. And it's not just Monsanto. But so we see it in our food supply. We're seeing it in our businesses. And again, diversity, this is, you know, I was telling you a week ago after I came back from Cuba about how in Cuba they allow capitalism. You can become a capitalist, essentially, or at least engage in free enterprise. You can start a business, but you can't serve more than 50 people with that business. Now, this is principally applies to restaurants, but there are similar size limits on other things, whether you want to open a company that services cars or whatever. You can't open a chain. You can only open one store. That's the bottom line. India had a law up until, I don't know, maybe a decade or so ago that said that no company or family could own more than 2 retail stores in the entire country. As a consequence of that, there were tens of thousands of small stores all over India that supported local families, family-owned enterprises. Now, it was less efficient than Walmart, but it didn't produce a couple of billionaire families like Walmart did. You know, the Walton family is cumulatively I think there's 5 direct heirs of Sam Walton. They're worth like $100 billion. You know, that money, had we not lost our economic diversity as a result of Ronald Reagan no longer enforcing the Sherman Act, if communities had said to Walmarts, no, you know, because we know now, on average, when a Walmart opens in a town, in a small town, that town will lose, on average, around 100 businesses. They just get wiped out by the Walmart. And everybody's always celebrating it as, oh, it's more efficient. You know, our food supply, it's more efficient with single species. Well, this is the problem. I mean, you know, in a way, it was the problem that the Irish had in 1845, I think, was the Irish potato famine, right around there, anyway. And it was that the variety of potatoes that they were eating in Ireland were vulnerable to a particular type of blight, which is a fungal infection, and that, you know, they had a year or so of weather that was conducive to more fungus on the plants, and the blight came along, and you know, you combine that with the fact that the British had made a law that said that the Irish could not eat the wheat that they were growing because that was growing for export. 1 million people starved to death in Ireland, and at the same time that Ireland was actually exporting food. It's kind of a separate story, but the point is that they had lost the diversity of their food supply. Now, in this case, it was that loss of diversity was imposed on them by British economic laws, but they had lost the diversity of their food supply and thus found themselves subject to famine and malnutrition. An entire generation, probably multiple generations of Irish people. So whether we're looking at business, I'm in favor of diversity, and frankly, tariffs would reduce the power of multinational corporations, and companies would start having to look at domestic markets and saying, okay, we're going to do business in the United States. How do we do it most efficiently? How do we do it most effectively? You know, if Apple had to make their Apple products in the United States, think of all the businesses, all the factories, all the supporting companies. We really need to seriously consider the reality of this, not just from the economic point of view, but from a scientific, you know, point of view. This biodiversity, cultural diversity, economic diversity, these things are all necessary to create resilience. Diverse societies are resilient societies. You know, when we went into World War II, we had manufacturers all over this country, small companies that were making things that started making things for the, you know, material for the war effort. And that, we were self-sufficient. We made our own steel. Our car factories turned themselves into tank factories and airplane factories. Our factories that were making ladies' nylons turned into parachute factories and things like that. But we had all those businesses here. So we were resilient enough to withstand a world war. 2 of them, in fact. We don't have that resilience now. You know, frankly, if we went to war with China, I think we'd be screwed. Because, you know, if China were just to cut off everything to the United States suddenly and say, okay, that's it, no more stuff. You know, where are you going to get your phone from? They're made in South Korea or in China. Parts of them are made in Germany, I know, and Nokia in Sweden, but we're not making them here. And it's not just your phone. I mean, you know, it's where are you going to get your computer from? Where are you going to get your television from? Where are you going to get anything? We need to start manufacturing these things in the United States and build a diverse manufacturing sector, just like we need to maintain biological diversity to stave off extinction, just like we should have diversity in our food supply so that we're getting all the micronutrients that are associated with these different varieties of plants that we're probably missing out on now by only eating, you know, 1 or 2 species of each of the primary food plants that we eat. So you know, diversity to me is a big deal, and I wanted to put that in your brain.